Penso em mim em miúdo e não era possível imaginar que o mundo fosse girar assim tão depressa. Mas de repente abres os olhos e estás no futuro. És um ponto numa complexa rede interligada.
O mar. Sempre tive uma relação forte com o mar. Na escola, quando me perguntavam o que queria ser, já dizia que o meu sonho era ser cientista. Agradava-me a ideia de explorar novos mundos no mundo.
Renovam-se os códigos, caem os muros, exponenciam-se também as possibilidades. Tudo à volta é novidade e desafio.
A fórmula? Penso que o segredo é perceber que, tão decisivo quanto a direção,
É escolher quem ter ao lado para conduzir e orientar a caminhada.
You know what, right now, breaking news here, stocks all around the world are tanking because of the crisis on Wall Street. Pauline Chu is in for Jennifer this morning. I can't imagine how jittery the nerves must be on Wall Street for that.
Well, I can tell you already that the Dow is expected to open down 300 points this morning, Robin, so that gives you an indication of how jittery the markets are. This is such a blow to investors, whether you're a big trader or whether you have a 401k, and we're waiting for the market to open in about 2.5 hours, so we'll see how this plays out. Around the world, both Asian and European shares are sharply lower. Asia's biggest stock exchanges in Japan and Hong Kong are closed, but every market open is in the red. India down 5.4%, Taiwan down 4.1%. Same story in Europe. German shares are off 3%, London down 2.7%, and U.S. stocks could open lower by 300 points, as I mentioned earlier. And this is all because we're waking up to two fewer investment banks on Wall Street. Lehman Brothers has filed for bankruptcy, and Bank of America is taking over Merrill Lynch in a $50 billion deal. So during all of this, the Fed is trying to calm investors. For the first time in nearly 100 years, it's loosening lending rules, making it easier for banks to borrow money from the Fed. The Fed also holds a meeting tomorrow, and they're expected to leave interest rates unchanged at 2%. But now economists think we could see a rate cut in the coming weeks because of everything that's happened. And a quick note on the huge bailouts for mortgage companies Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The government now says departing CEOs will not get the golden parachute in their contracts. They could have received in total up to $25 million. And Robin, when we did this story last week, there was immense outrage from our viewers on taxpayer dollars going to the company CEOs as they leave. So now it looks like this will not happen.
All right, thank you so much, Pauline. Appreciate it. And we're going to be watching to the Dow futures to see how the markets are expected to react to this word that two of the biggest firms on Wall Street are no more, but we'll put this morning.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Good afternoon. All right, it needs a bit of energy. It's 6:30 in the afternoon, so some energy here. This is the first Dean Speaker Series event that we're going to have. This is an event where basically we're going to have several keynote speakers highlighting different areas of the economy or the corporate world. But before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to talk a little bit to our alumni community and also to our students sitting here, just to give you two headlines about news about from Católica. We started the year 2 weeks ago, basically with a new cohort and the graduate class. Fantastic, it's the super high quality undergraduate class, record high GPA grade or undergraduate grade of admissions. That was very helpful. And also the international master programs. We continue to be very international, more than 50% international students, many of them sitting here in the audience. Again, a record in terms of quality of these students come from more than 30 countries, and this is basically what I wanted to share with you. Very quick news about our school. Now, and also we went up, I forgot about this, 1 week ago exactly we had the good news in the Financial Times where we went up 8 places in the ranking. We are now ranked 30 worldwide in the master program, so that's 30 in the world, that's pretty good. I'm going to pass immediately now to the speaker and the topic. So the topic came because this Saturday, many of you sitting here in the room, you have no recollection of this because you were teenagers or maybe you were 10 or 11 years old 10 years ago. But in 2008, September 15, a big event happened, okay? And the big event that happened was basically that the whole financial world collapsed, okay? It was two of the biggest investment banks in the world collapsed in the US. Later on, this translated into a big European crisis as well through capital market flows, and then become an economic crisis. The euro was at threat, disintegration of Europe, and this was basically something that started 10 years ago, and so we decided to commemorate the 10 years post-financial crisis with this keynote speaker we have today. So let me present Mr. Mario Centeno. So Mario graduated in economics, and then he has 2 master degrees, one in applied mathematics and one in economics. And then he has a PhD in economics from Harvard. Following that, he became an economist at the Portuguese Central Bank in the year 2000, where he had a number of roles, and he had also a number of policy roles at the European level, like the European Policy Committee from the European Commission. An accomplished scholar, published several scientific articles, books, chapters of books. And later, in 2015, he was given the challenge and he accepted to become the finance minister of the Portuguese government. That was in November 2015. And later on, he was distinguished by his European peers to be the chairman of the Eurogroup, which is basically the group of finance ministers, and he's the president of the Eurogroup. Mario also, I can give you some tips, maybe not for the Q&A, but other things. He likes to cook a lot. He likes football, although the choices on football are debatable, okay? But for those of you, not today, we're not talking about it. But he likes rugby as well. He's a very good rugby fan. And without further ado, Mario, thank you very much for being here. We're delighted to hear you talking about the challenges of the Portuguese economy. I know you're going to focus a little bit on the current moments and the last few years, but also going back to the past. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and thank you, Nuno, for inviting me to be here today, and all of you to decided to spend a few minutes with us. You know, finance ministers always talk under the control of a written document, so I may do both and try to keep this entertaining and alive for the next few minutes. And the best part of these talks is always the Q&A session, so we will have one, and I'm very much looking for it. The video that we just saw was just the beginning of the tip of the iceberg of all the crises. A lot more happened after September 15, and a lot more happened, especially in Europe. Europe, we all know by now, was definitely not prepared to face a crisis like that. If any institutional setting is prepared, but certainly Europe was not prepared. And I remember that at the time, I was not 10, but I was not much older. But I was old enough to be working at the Bank of Portugal. And the discussions and the debate on Portugal and on Europe that we had by then at that, fairly high level, can be summarized by a very profound, deep statement that I heard from a few officials then. And that expression was, we were caught. We were not prepared. We were on a trajectory that was not really up to the challenges that this type of crisis would place in the following years to Portugal and to Europe as well. So, in a nutshell, I think we can say today that the crisis exposed really the vulnerabilities of the Eurozone, while citizens, companies, banks, and even member states were accumulating significant amounts of debt. And this was the result, probably, of a misplaced set of incentives coming from the economic and monetary union construction or process, which for many of us meant on the first place low interest rates and the absence of exchange risk and inflation. And this economic environment was probably not very well understood for many of these economic agents of how they will need to behave in such a setting. Today we are discussing still the completion of the economic and monetary union. This is probably my main task as president of the Eurogroup, to coordinate the effort to complete the banking union. But the banking union is something that was not known institutionally in Europe in 2008. We started building the banking union only in 2012. So it was already a response to the crisis. And we can say that it was a brave response, but it was not enough, and we have not yet completed. So not only we have to do more, but we also have to complete what we started after the crisis. That was not the only answer to the crisis by Europe. We also established the European Stability Mechanism, which is today 500 billion euro firepower that is meant to protect the sovereigns, to protect and to help us to go through the crisis management that we now understand that we have to be prepared. But still, the ESM lacks instruments. Out of the 6 mechanisms and instruments that we have at the ESM, we only use 2 up to today. We may say that maybe that we didn't use the other 4, because we have dealt with the crisis in a good way, so that we didn't really need to use them. It's probably a short and incomplete evaluation of what are the capabilities of the ESM, which again are a lot, but still not enough for us to deal with crisis management in the future. And I used to say that in Europe we are doing okay because we've been growing for 21 consecutive quarters. This is an all-time record for Europe. 21 positive growth in consecutively in quarter by quarter, and this is really impressive. It's also impressive the number of jobs that Europe has been able to put in the labor market. Since 2013, we added 80 million jobs to our labor market. This is again is a record figure for the 19 members of the Eurozone. Never before employment grew so fast as in this period of time after the crisis. And this, I mean, for politicians, tend to be enough for us to praise the success of this period. But I've been quite often trying to prevent us from some indulgency or complacency with this type of success, because we know, again, to finish my sentence, with incomplete institutions, we can only get into incomplete results. And we need to understand this very, very, very clearly so that we do not lose the reform momentum that somehow we can create in Europe. Now that we have a very unique moment in the European Union, remember that the euro is one of the youngest currencies in the world, and after the exit of Greece from its program, the third program, in August this year, for 8 years this is the first meeting of the Eurogroup, this meeting in September, in which we did not have in the agenda a program for a country. So this opens up the agenda of the Eurogroup completely for us to refocus in these reforms that are much needed in Europe. The instruments that we have in Europe have been working, and we are sometimes quite harsh in our evaluations. I'm going to give you one example. You can then discuss other examples or other indicators if you want to put more in this debate. The standard deviations of fiscal deficits in the euro area today is at its lowest level since we have comparable statistics, which is the mid-90s. This means that the fiscal positions of countries in the euro area today are more coordinated than ever. And this is again the result of the multilateral surveillance that we implemented in Europe to manage our euro area in a better way. So things are paying off. And they are also paying off in the financial sector. We implemented the single resolution and the single supervision mechanisms in Europe. This is leveling and creating a level playing field for European banks that did not exist before. And we have been also able, and European banks have been quite successful in doing this, in reducing the legacies from the crisis. Legacies accumulated in the balance sheets of banks, and just to name two very easy to identify legacies, and in public administration, in the public debt that in some countries went to the roof. Those legacies are hard to tackle, but we can say today, looking at reduction in non-performing loans in the European banks, that we have really quite efficiently been reducing these legacies. And if we can do the following exercise, and much research is needed also into this, and being in a university is probably the best place for me to call to hear a call for papers and a call for research on the quality of the new flow that is being generated in terms of loans, in terms of credit in the financial sector, and how this translates into the real economy. We need to separate the two quite clearly. The quality of the legacies, which is necessarily poor, and it will take quite some time, in some cases, for us to get rid of, and the quality of the flows. And this is the challenge that we have in Europe, to increase cross-border investment, to make, to design, to complete the institutional landscape in Europe, so that the huge amount of savings that we generate in Europe can be invested in Europe, and that this can or have a contribution to the future of Europeans, as we can put it today. What about Portugal? Just a few more minutes, sorry, of your time, to take a quick look at what happened in Portugal. Portugal was one of the countries that certainly was not prepared to face the hardship of the crisis. And if we cross this with the fact that Europe was also not prepared to protect or to shield Portugal as a member state of the Euro of this crisis, we eventually, in the second wave of the crisis, after the first big global crisis of 2008-2009, we entered into a spiral of sovereign debt crisis that first caught Greece and Ireland, and next Portugal, and we had to ask for support of the so-called Troika under an adjustment program. The adjustment program was as hard as adjustment programs always are under these circumstances, and we had to make, really needed to implement enough structural reforms so that the imbalances that we were accumulating could started receding, and we changed the quality of the flows in our economy. It took a little bit for the economy to recover from this negative impact of the adjustment process. But if I am to single out an event, I'm going to make it two events out of our recovery process that really, in my event study that I am here doing with you, will pinpoint the change in the situation of the Portuguese economy. I will name two such events. One was the recapitalization of Caixa Geral de Depósitos, which was achieved compatible with state aid procedures, but not being a state aid, in August 2016. This was a major achievement by the Portuguese Republic. The first time a bank is recapitalized in these conditions in Europe, a very important bank for the financial sector in Portugal, and that changed the way domestically and outside Portugal, the financial sector in Portugal was considered. Remember that in late 2015, the vast majority of assets in the banking sector in Portugal were in banks that were under resolution, about to enter resolution, without capital, or in which the private sector and the shareholders, the private shareholders, were in a convulsion, in a big difficulty internally, and I'm not naming any institution, but you can certainly figure out which institution I'm referring to, so that under my account, like more than 75% of assets in the banking sector were in balance sheets of banks with severe problems. There's no economy that can recover out of this situation. It's basically impossible. So, in the last 3 years, we've been stabilizing the financial sector, and the single most important factor for this, it's my view on this recent experience was precisely the recapitalization of Caixa Geral de Depósitos. The second event that I think really changed the way the outside world considered the Portuguese economy was that in 2016 also, Portugal for the first time met the goal that in the budget deficit that it has committed in the budget proposal. This was absolutely key for the Portuguese economy. Following this, we were able to avoid 2 processes of sanctions by the European Commission for not fulfilling the targets committed under the Stability and Growth Pact, both in 2016. We exited the excessive deficit procedure, and we started a process of going back to investment grade that started precisely 1 year from today with the upgrade by Standard & Poor's, which was the first out of the 3 main rating agencies that changed its notation of the Portuguese public debt to investment grade. This changed dramatically this set of events, the confidence, both again domestically and outside Portugal, on the Portuguese economic and financial processes. Of course, much needs to be done. That's why so many young students are in this room to play the role in the future of both in the public administration and in the private sector for Portugal. This is a process, and we need to feed this process constantly, so that we can achieve the major goal of Portuguese citizens, which is to live in a stable country with good economic prospects. And now I'm gonna tell you about, see, I've been used this much, it's certainly a problem for me. Just to finalize and to open up the Q&A part of this, I'm gonna recall you that in June 2017, last year, there was a poll, and this was a very interesting poll, which, not surprisingly, did not have much impact in the media. And it was a newspaper, those regular polls that they conduct every month, and they asked people which, out of 3 events, most increased the self-esteem of Portuguese people. And these three events were winning the European Football Championship in 2016, winning the Eurovision Song Contest in May 2017, or exiting the excessive deficit procedure, which happened also in May 2017. And surprisingly or not, out of these three very important events for us, in all domains of our lives, the choice that got the most number of selections was precisely exiting the EDP. And this may not be quite politically correct, but even in the subsample of men, exiting the EDP got more votes than the soccer. I myself would be a little bit divided. But I'm telling you this because of the following. The Portuguese citizens, our society, changed quite substantially in the course of all these difficult times. It was very, very hard for Portugal to witness 500,000 of our youngest, more skilled individuals leaving the country in the period between 2011 and 2015. In some age brackets, the reduction in the population for individuals aged between 20 and 25 reached 25%. A quarter of our young, again, more qualified people left the country during this period. And this was really something that, even more than the video that we just saw, was what changed the nature of our collective process, if I may put it like that. I don't want to be dramatic. In the recent past, and this weighs a lot in the way politics is done in Portugal these days. This is something that politicians need to remember every time they make decisions, and this is certainly the most positive result of our recent history and the lessons we can learn out of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this introduction. We will open for Q&A shortly, and I'd like to see we have basically a students audience here, and so students, this is not for grading, okay? So you're not going to be graded on the questions, nor the quality of the answers or the questions, okay? So this is not for grading. But before going to the floor, I have two questions for you. One is related to Europe and the European governance, and the other, since we are in the business school, is related to math. Okay? So the first question is related to Europe versus the US. This was indeed a financial crisis that started in the US, as we know, but actually it left much bigger scars in Europe than in the US. European banks, they used to be in the league tables, but now if you look at the league tables, you barely see any European banks. European growth is low, and ultimately there seems to be problems of the governance at the EU level that compared to the US we lack speed, agility, and the capability of implementing reforms. So how do you see this going forward in the future? That would be my first question to you. Second question is to Mario as the leader. Okay, so you're a leader. You're actually a leader in a very complex organization with very complex characters. And so I have a simple question for you, which is how do you get things done?
That's where the rugby tweaks enter the most. It's quite important to be resilient and to face these big guys running into you. Well, it's very, very interesting questions, and it was the first one. Well, we made a huge progress in Europe. I commented this last Friday at the LSE in a talk pretty much as the one that we are having here today. And I can repeat myself today, given that you didn't listen to that comment. Just for you to have an idea of how much progress we made in Europe, and I can follow your line of reasoning that we still have a lot to do. But at the beginning of this crisis, when the ECB established the first support programs for debt, sovereign debt in Europe, the procedure was something similar to this. At 6:30 in the morning, reserve departments of all EU Eurozone central banks will meet, engage in a conference call to decide how much debt of each of the countries that were targeted by the program will be made operational in that day. You see, it was something like 17 people connected via a conference call to decide on a single figure to implement a crucial program to the survival of the euro. If you consider how inefficient this was, because of the lack of instruments we had by then, this is pretty much like Pony Express time for monetary policy operation in a currency area. But that was what the most advanced institutions that we had by then. Of course, today things are completely different. We matured our institutions. We gained confidence in the functioning of the euro system. We award the countries the ability, the central banks, the ability to do these operations, and the most recent QNE, quantitative easing procedure. So we evolved on that. But we have still a lot to do. Again, we cannot lose momentum, but we cannot be too harsh with the evaluation of our process in any way. You know, the US took more than 50 years to establish its deposit insurance system. It was back in the 30s, last century, I know. We can learn from their experience for sure. But politically, and that was the problem, more than 150 proposals were presented in the House of Representatives for them to be able, because of the tension this generates across states, but also in the US by then, to get into a system that we today evaluate that it works. Well, we are discussing this for a couple of years already, maybe a little more than that, but not without outside crisis mood. So we need to continue, and we will certainly accomplish these reforms that are very important for you. So I am optimistic on that side. And again, given that we lag behind the US in these institutional settings, we also have a lot to gain expanding our frontier possibilities much more than the US. So I am optimistic on Europe, and I think we will eventually understand how much we have to benefit from these reforms. And believe me, I'm not going to reveal nothing particularly hot, but the meetings at the Eurogroup today are much more prone to this type of discussions than 1 year ago. just to not go too much into the past. So yes, we need to further develop these institutions. We have very good role models in many of these institutions. We just need to politically be able to reach a consensus out of difficult decisions in many cases. And how to deal with with these very complex environments in which I am involved. I'm an academic, I must say. So, and I'm going to say something that may seem to be quite basic, but believe me, it's the way I can portray this process, and describe the process as it is today. We need to be credible. It's pretty much as when we are presenting an econometrics paper. So we need to explain to everybody what the numbers in a table mean, why are these numbers there, and hope that they were correct. Because there's one thing that it is for sure, is that once in academia we don't see the referees of our papers. In politics it's not like that, and our referees are all over the place, so we better get the numbers right. And this is a big effort. I don't know if I accomplished it as much as I wanted, but the only way to survive in a world that rotates very, very fast is to be credible and to be very open in all the discussions you have.
Thank you very much. So we will open now for questions. Who has any questions? So I'll moderate. I'll choose from the different side of the room. Okay, maybe we'll start here.
Thank you very much for the interesting speech. I would have 3 questions. I hope that's not...
Maybe just state your name and where you come from.
Okay, I'm Hans and I'm from Berlin in Germany. So my first question would be, from what I've understood, is that you said in the beginning that that we are now having the smallest standard deviation of fiscal deficits in Europe at the moment. My question to that would be, is it the goal to equalize the fiscal deficits on the long term? And in whose favor would that be? My second question would be, I know from... Okay, sorry.
Any other question in the audience? Okay, in the back. Sure. It's rugby. That's the idea. Kind of rugby.
My question actually goes in line with what Alex asked, and it is basically, do you believe that a fiscal union will be in the future, or a possible or needed next step for the group?
Okay, thank you. Any other question?
Thank you for speech. One question is, what are the sectors, the activities of the financial markets that represent a concern for you?
Can you repeat?
You have to speak to the cube. That's a cube. You can speak to it. Yeah.
Thank you for speech. I just wanted to know if you can discuss a little bit about what are your main concerns on financial markets nowadays. There are some kind of finance products or sectors that is the main concern.
Yeah.
So it was here.
Yes, I'll try to be brief, also because the questions are somewhat hard. But let me take the goal of the Stability and Growth Pact is to coordinate policies across member states. One of it. The problem, and this is also at the core of the question that Nuno raised, it's that we started with a 90 pages document back in the late 90s, which was already complicated. And today, the current version of the Stability and Growth Pact has more than 600 pages. And this is a lesson for those of you who do contracts in their lives, because we Europeans tried to be the first guys in the world ever to write a complete contract, and we obviously failed to do that, because we know from contract theory that there are no complete contracts. But nevertheless, we try very hard year after year to implement what is meant to be a complete contract. The goal of this is not really to equalize all deficits, because we know that the current position vis-à-vis, for example, debt of our economies is different. But the goal is to, over time, because it's important to do so in economic and monetary unions, to bring these positions, these fiscal positions of countries as close as possible, given the other differences that we have, because we really need to be able, each part of the economic and monetary union need to be ready to respond also by itself to future events that may not be that pleasant. But of course, we cannot do this member by member state. And I think, and this is being discussed as we speak in Europe, we need to take steps into some dimension of fiscal capacity for the Eurozone. There is currently a proposal by the German finance minister that is being discussed. I will be in Berlin on Wednesday to discuss this with Minister Schulz, establishing a European reinsurance system that in some way may mimic the US experience with such a system at the federal level. This is a very important step because it's the first time such an instrument is proposed in Europe, and that will have all positive impacts that an unemployment insurance system has in an economic environment. So there are other ideas, but some degree of fiscal union is at this stage not a taboo anymore in our discussions. As of the financial market, I think we need really to work and to make progress towards further and healthier financial integration. At the beginning of the euro area, financial integration was very, very fast, maybe too much for what we were prepared to take. But then the crisis meant big fragmentation of financial sectors. Today, cross-border investments are still very low. The current stage of the banking union meant that most banks went domestic instead of opening up across Europe. We need to finish the banking union and the capital markets union in order for this fragmentation of the financial markets to be reduced. and that's probably my main concern vis-à-vis the future of the financial sector in Europe.
Any other questions? We have time for a few more. Okay, here in front. Can you throw it, please, over here?
Here, good. Right. First of all, thank you very much for the interesting talk and to you for creating this event.
And I'm very glad the microphone works. We're trying it out today. No one breaks their head, okay?
Okay.
It's soft.
I'm Danny from Germany as well. My question is more regarding the reaction to the crisis in 2008. So, one aspect you pointed out was focusing on the Eurogroup, on the development of the Eurogroup in this time. Would you, or can you still point out one major or one specific step which you would consider as a mistake that was done in the recuperation of the financial crisis? And if so, if you can identify one, what did you learn from that, or what did others, or what can we learn from that for future crises? Maybe not limited to the Eurogroup, but in general, the European Union.
Okay, other questions? So we're going to take three questions. Okay, slightly in the back then.
Good afternoon, my name is Hong from China, and I currently work at the Portuguese insurance company Fidelidade. And my question is related to the events this year about the capital markets. And I don't know if the minister has any concern over the Portuguese government bond under the negative impact of the Italian government bond turbulence this year. Thank you.
Thank you. In the back, then we throw it to the other side.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank you for your presence here. I'm Milan Portuguese. And so a lot of specialty newspapers and renowned investors are starting to point to 2020 as the peak of the current economic cycle. I'd like your comments on that, and also what if, as the chairman of the Eurogroup, what might be the consequences for Europe, and what if you are attentive to those with indicators.
Okay, one more for now. Move on. Okay, so this side over here. It's very soft. Don't worry. Okay, it will not kill you. Very good.
Almost. Thank you very much. My name is Annette Bongard. I'm from the LSE. I didn't hear your talk last week because we were traveling to Portugal. So sorry for that.
Lucky you.
I was interested in I'm interested in your take on the European semester. So if you could just explain to what extent you think it is a success, or what would be its weak points, what would you improve? I would be grateful for that.
Okay. Well, it's a very interesting but a very, very difficult question to take. This one on the mistakes in the response to the previous crisis. You know, we need to understand that people by then they were working under a very rough, because it was incomplete setting of institutions. It is very easy for me to say that we took probably too long to understand what was the nature of the crisis, and how could we deal with a response that had not much at the union level. It was directed to countries to respond, and countries were, and again this connects with what Hans, I guess, has to, had a very different, very different starting positions before the crisis. So that the buffers that each country has to respond to the crisis made it very difficult for us to have a common answer to the crisis, given the lack of instruments in the first place. You know, I like events, and again I must say that it took us a bit to find a more coherent and speedy answer to the crisis, and probably the statement in London of President Draghi, the famous statement of whatever it takes, was the event that speed up the process of dealing with the crisis in a faster and more effective way. Well, it's very hard for me to speak of specific countries. Believe me, I mean, it's not. I'm not saying this because I don't want to speak about specific countries. So I'll give you an answer focusing on Portugal. The good thing about Portuguese debt these days is that it really is not following Italy in the markets. If you go and plot the spreads of Portuguese debt vis-à-vis the main currencies, you see that we are much more closer to Germany and Spain than to Italy. So this is a good sign that the market evaluates the Portuguese debt differently than those of countries that unfortunately had quite of a rally in the latest months, as it was the case of Italy. Italy is now supposed, as all other countries in Europe, to present the draft budget plans for 2019, and there is a great expectation among all member states in the Eurogroup that the presentation of the budget for 2019 for Italy may contribute to a correction of this gap that Italian spreads made vis-à-vis other currencies, other sovereigns, in Europe in the last months. If 2020 will be the change in the cycle, it's very hard to tell, of course. I think Europe still, if it reforms itself, if we can find agreement on the very difficult files that we have at Eurogroup, and this connects to the last question, can still expand a little bit more the recovery process that we have. I mentioned in my initial statement that we've been growing for 21 consecutive quarters. This is a long period of growth and recovery, but if we can improve in the domestically in Europe the conditions of our institutional setting, and if the markets and economic agents are confident that we can deliver, this can be further extended a bit more. Of course, we can never forget that we are starting from a very, very low point because of the crisis, but still it takes a bit for economies in the present context to grow, and we've been testing a lot, most of the time in an non-necessary way our recovery. I think we need to be friendlier to our recovery. If we take these decisions, this is the best way for us to be friend of this recovery. And the agenda for the semester and what I will consider a success in the second semester, this was your question. We are starting the semester in the best possible environment, and of course this may be too risky for me to say this, but given what my analysis of the political situation in Europe, I can take this risk at this moment in time. Maybe next time I may pay for this, but so far let me be again optimistic with you. We are starting the semester with no country under program. We are starting the semester with new political cycles starting in several countries in Europe. Germany, the new finance minister of Germany was appointed only late in the first quarter of this year. So now is more on a cruise speed. We have established an agenda. Now the agenda is completely set. We know precisely what we are going to discuss up until December. And we had also the important contribution of France and Germany in the Meseberg Declaration on the goals that these two countries have for reforming Europe in the coming years. And this also was quite important, and it was achieved only in June 2018. So it was impossible for us to discuss that in the first semester, but not in the second. So the conditions are really positive for us, and I don't want to raise any excuse whatsoever for myself or for my colleagues not to do our job this time.
Thank you very much. So we're getting close to ending, but I want to give the final question to Hannah, who is the president of our CLIP, which is the Students-Led Finance Club. Hannah, please.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. And dear Mr. Minister, thank you very much for your useful insights you shared with us today. So my question is very Portugal-oriented. You refer to this problem, which I see as one of the main problems in Portugal, which is the migration of the young talent. So what I want to ask is what the government sees as the main factors which leads us, the young talent, to leave this amazing country, which seems amazing to grow, and how is the government armed to cope with this problem, and also to maybe attract talent from abroad. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for organizing also this event. And for being involved in this type of initiatives. Well, I am a finance minister, but I can share with you that the single most indicator that I look at every month is probably because I was trained as a labor economist, but I mean, you never improved on that. Is precisely the labor force. If it's growing, if it's not growing, and I can tell you precisely the months in which it started growing, increasing year on year, and it was May 2016. So, for me, the success of the economy, of the Portuguese economy, will not come if it's not with an increase in the labor force. And we were able to overturn the sign of the flow. So now we have an increase, so that inflows into the labor market are bigger than outflows. And this is absolutely crucial. you won't change the face of this also if this is not, of course, made of an increase on employment. And employment, especially salaried employment, is increasing in Portugal for more than 1.5 years already, by more than 5% or close to 5% in the social security records. And of course you need to improve the quality of jobs in Portugal, and this means higher wages, so that you can attract in very competitive European labor market all sorts of talents to the Portuguese economy. And you know, the statistics I have tell me that people changing jobs in Portugal in consecutive quarters get a wage increase that is on average close to 8%. And this is a very impressive figure for the Portuguese labor market, which means that churning and the process of increasing productivity in Portugal is picking up. And I am very much confident that we will see this in our national accounts. And you actually are already seeing this in our national accounts. And this is what drives the decisions of young workers, of older workers, of people in the labor market. The government can do some things to help this. We've been implementing and discussing, not implementing yet, but discussing measures that reduce segmentation in the labor market, trying to generate more stable employment relationships. Although, to be totally honest with you, this is not what is key at the beginning of a worker's career, but it is very important to portray the Portuguese labor market, which is one of the more segmented labor markets in Europe, in a way that may generate more confidence and trust as we move ahead in this growth dimension. Of course, we can also implement measures as the one that we will be discussing during this budget. The Prime Minister already announced that we will be presenting a measure that is meant to attract young talents outside Portugal, for them to come back to Portugal via a reduction in taxes and other sorts of support schemes. But the important thing, make no mistake, is for the labor market to react properly, for the economy to generate those jobs, because otherwise we won't be able to make it to the future. Fiscal stability is quite important to that, but that is another discussion that we can take probably next time. Gathering this talent to Portugal and making it possible to stay here is certainly a key objective for our development program, and we should not forget about it. And again, I will continue to look every month to this quite key statistic, which is labor force growth in Portugal. No country can recover from a crisis as the one that we have without the contribution of its labor force, and most important, above all, of the young generations that we invest a lot in Europe.
Thank you very much. Before closing the session, I would like to thank Mario for being the inaugural speaker of this series. Thank you very much, and I hope everybody has enjoyed. Please, a round of applause for our first speaker. welcoming students, what's the tradition that we have in these occasions?
Very good.
Okay, thank you very much once again for being here and thanks for